What you've got to do is realize the opportunities that are around you. And what happened to me was I looked around and I thought, well, what can I do to help make, I was 45 at the age, I mean, much older than all of you. I was a 45-year-old guy who had worked in small businesses and had developed all sorts of things for other companies, other businesses. I was a printer, I was a designer, I was a publisher, and I did lots of stuff for everybody else. But as of yet, I had not made my own mark. I re-met a guy in 1987 who I'd known when I was 21. I'd met him when I was a homeless guy on the streets of London, well, the streets of Edinburgh, sorry, but I re-met him in London. I was a person who was robbing to survive. I was smashing windows and breaking in and stealing antiques. Not a very high level of antiques, so I never got much money for it, and I had to keep doing it. So I was a part of the problem. Antisocial behavior, crime, drink, drugs, and all those sorts of things. And I met this guy, this very big-nosed Scotsman, horrible geezer. Didn't like him, but I liked the fact that he could buy me a drink. And as you know, that's important if you're thirsty. Knocked around with him for about a year and then forgot all about him. And 20 years later, in the late 80s, fate smiled on me and I turned on the TV, and this guy who had been a provider of drink had turned into a multi-millionaire. Now, I think we all have to bear in mind that when it comes to meeting people with money, you have to be very principled. If you meet people who've got a shed load of money, the first principle is stick with them. Tell them exactly what they want to hear, because they may prove useful at some stage. Gordon Roddick, who with his wife Anita Roddick had started the Body Shop, the late Anita Roddick, had become a multi-millionaire by building an enormous network of thousands of shops around the world, around the United Kingdom as well, and had made a lot of money, and had got at that stage in life when he thought, hang on, I need to do something more than run a business. In the summer of 1990, he was in New York, and he was walking through the Midtown Manhattan, and a very large black guy came towards him. And Gordon did think, this guy looks as though he's making a beeline for me, and what's he going to do? Is he going to rob me? And Gordon waited for the impact, and the bloke said, excuse me, brother, would you like to buy a copy of my street paper? And Gordon said, yeah, how much is it? He says, it's $1. So Gordon says, how does it work? He says, well, it works very simply. The guy said, I won't do the American accent. The guy said, works very simply. I buy the paper for 50 cents. I sell it to you for $1. I'm an ex-offender, just come out of the penitentiary system. I'm 54. I come from Brownsville. No one is going to be giving a big black guy at 54 a job. I've become homeless, and then I meet these people selling a paper, and they're giving me an opportunity to earn my own money and not to rely on begging or thieving or selling my body or whatever. And God went, wow. Came back to the United Kingdom, got the Body Shop Foundation to do a wonderful feasibility study, and they went and they spoke to all of the big homeless organizations. Wonderful people, committed people, people who were in the profession of helping the homeless, aiding the homeless. Wonderful. And at the end of 6 months, it proved that if you wanted to start a street paper in the United Kingdom, in London on the streets, then it was a very, very bad idea. And the principal reason for that is if you gave homeless people the means of earning, you would never be quite sure what they would do with their money. In the same way as I dread to think, and I say, that a lot of people in the area that we now live in may spend their money unwisely. Sorry, in the area that we're now in. But I don't think your employer can come to you and say, excuse me, how are you going to spend your money? But with homeless people, with the poor, we're allowed to say, all right, then we've given you some money. How are you going to spend it? So there was a big problem. The very idea of giving the poor the means of making their own money was going to be a real, real thorn in the side. And there's been an enormous increase as the market, as capitalism itself has expanded, and the population of the world has expanded. There's been an enormous expansion of charities that give handouts. And if you go anywhere in the world, you will see how sometimes the giving of handouts does distort the local economy and distorts all sorts of things. And yet it carries on. On the streets of London in the 1990s, there were 501 homeless organisations in London alone. And every one of them gave all sorts of things. They gave beds, they gave a place to watch TV, a place to have sandwiches. They even gave condoms. I was on one of these events when all these lovely young people came around giving out condoms to the homeless. And I said, when do the women arrive? And they threw me out. I was making a very legitimate point. How can you have a relationship in a doorway? And I said, you're taking the mickey. I didn't use that word, I used another word. But you're joking. You've got to address the reasons why these people have become homeless, not make them more comfortable on the streets. Anyway, there was not one organisation in London alone that gave the homeless the chance of making their own money. So what was happening was that there were 501 organisations that don't give money to the homeless. You can't rely on them. The poor, how dare you even compromise their integrity by giving them the means of making their own money. I tell you, and I know many dealers and have known many dealers in my life. I grew up with one who imported the largest amount of cocaine into this country. He never sold his drugs to the poor. He sold them to the people who worked in the City of London and had a bit of money. So if you want to talk about who are the big drug users in this country, it's certainly not the poor. Anyway, what we decided was we would launch a business called The Big Issue. Gordon asked me, because he'd known I was an ex-homeless person, I was an ex-offender, I was an ex-drug user, I was not frightened of the homeless, I certainly had no sentimental attachment to the poor, because having lived in a London Irish slum, where I was taught as a child, not only was I poor, but I had to think poor, so therefore I was taught not to like black people and Jews and Indians and everybody else, including the English. I still haven't made my mind up about them. So I was one of those persons who got out of poverty. I had been a part of the problem, and now Gordon Roddick, God bless him, was giving me, at the age of 45, the opportunity of becoming a part of the solution. And we were going to do something very, very magic, and very dumb, and very stupid. We were going to give the homeless the chance of making their own money. to stand on their own 2 feet. Do come in, come and sit right down in the front, because anybody who arrives late should be ashamed of themselves. No one has the right to be late for me. Have I embarrassed you enough? Good. Anyway, we haven't got... 45 minutes is terrible. I normally need 2 or 3 hours. Anyway, so we launched a paper. We launched a business. We didn't launch a charity. I said to Gordon, I love charity. In fact, when I was a boy, I was brought up by the Sisters of Charity. I was in an orphanage for 3 years, and every day I was reminded that there were hard-working people there working their knackers off so that I could have a bed and a bowl of soup. And I was not wanting to start a charity and be surrounded by the well-intentioned telling the poor how needy they were. So we started a business. The Big Issue Limited is a business that I own. I'm the shareholder. I don't have trustees. I don't trust them. Because I know what will happen. They'll all start saying, oh, fill in this form. Or do this piece of training in the Antarctic. Or I don't know what it's. So we started a business. And immediately, we had an enormous effect on the opportunities that did not exist amongst the poor. Up until 1991 in London, if you were poor, you could be provided, as I said, for everything, but not for ambition, not for the opportunity of increasing your self-esteem. Imagine what happens. And I'm sure on occasions we have all lost our self-esteem. Imagine what it's like if you lose your self-esteem and then another occasion happens and another occasion, and before it you're so eroded you almost believe that you will never ever reverse the fortunes that the misfortunes you're in. So we started in London. And we began to work with people. We worked carefully with a lot of people. We raised their self-esteem. We gave people the chance of making their own money. We helped people save. Incredible. Save £5 a month. Say you're a person who's never saved anything because you've got a drink problem and a drug problem, or you've got mental health problems. And somebody comes along and says, if you sell this paper, you'll earn your own money, you'll raise your self-esteem, you'll meet members of the public, like yourself, who are all almost social workers to a man and woman. I have never met so many social workers as I've met who are current buyers of the Big Issue. Everyone you meet is buying not just the paper, they're buying into the very idea that somebody has dusted themselves down and stood up and given themselves an opportunity. You can't, when you're begging, I used to be a beggar, it was fantastic. The amount of illnesses my mother had, I mean, she would have died 9 times over. Oh, please, man. And when you're a beggar, you're like, you try selling the Big Issue like, you've got to sell the Big Issue as an up. And the people who sell the Big Issue as an up, sell it. So we changed the chemistry. And suddenly, we were meeting people who were being transformed.